Hey everyone, we're back. And this is a different setting than the garage. Much to my advantage, it's heated here and a little easier to concentrate, a little better for sound also, I'd imagine. This is the second M3 video that I've made, and I'm changing it up a little bit with the setting. We're going to have some clips from the shop in a minute. I wanted to talk about the origin of the project a little bit and how I came to decide to buy a used shell. Why didn't I buy a complete car? Why didn't I hire someone to build a shell? Why didn't I build it from a regular E30? These are all possible avenues to take when you're doing a project like this, and I gave each possibility a lot of consideration when I embarked on the project initially. Let's start with building a race car from a complete car. Let's investigate that option a little bit. So the value of a road-going M3 today is anywhere between $60,000 and $100,000, let's say. You could recuperate a lot of that money by parting it out. You'd want to keep the engine. For this particular project, you would not want the transmission. You would sell that. Let's say for the sake of rounding, you sell $20,000 of parts out of that car that you've bought for, say, $60,000 if you bought a rough one. So now you're at $40,000 best case. Best case. I don't really think there's $20,000 of parts to sell out of a road car, but this is just to suit the example. So from there, you still have to strip the car and add the cage and do all these other things. So we'll leave that option right there. Say $40,000. Another option, have a place in Europe build the car. There aren't many places here that could do it. I stand by that. I'm sure that people in the comments will want to challenge me, but I'd be happy to talk about that more. The two shops that I investigated that I found best equipped to do a project like this were Ton Vink and Mats van der Brand, and they're both in the Netherlands. There's yet a third option in France called Matter. Matter used to build shells for factory teams, and they have tons of experience. It's an awesome choice. I priced that one out too. So let's start there actually. With Matter, you can pay them to find a shell, and then they have all the resources in-house to dip it, strip it, do the cage, do the fabrication. And for that service, if you want an M3 VIN on the car, this is something we can talk more about, you're looking at €50,000. And it's not clear to me, because I didn't get this far in discussion, if that shell includes door panels, hood, deck lid, wing, all the things that bolt to the actual shell of the car. And if I had to guess, I would say it doesn't. So you're at €50,000. Then you need to import the car. You need to ship the car. Let's just add, in today's shipping world, containers are incredibly expensive. You have to ship the car from Matter to the port. Let's add $10,000, €60,000. So over $75,000 for a shell. That's with Matter, but it's awesome. It's homologated. You have your certs and you have your VIN. There's another option with Matter to use an E30 shell, and they can convert it with panels to look like an M3. That's a great option for a race car, but if you ever hope to sell the car, and if you want to build a car with a lot of value, you need that VIN. You want originality. Originality promotes value, so you would want to keep that VIN. Next option, Ton Vink. To be honest, that was my number one option. That's what I wanted to do when I set out on this project, and every time I approached it from a different angle, it just turned out that I didn't have the money. I wouldn't be able to afford to do that project in that way. So Ton is very flexible. He also has a lot of good customers. He doesn't want to waste time talking to someone like me about how to save money, essentially paying him less money. The way we started our discussion was, can you build me a shell? I just want the shell. I'll take care of the rest. Build me a shell, prepare it. His shells are beautiful. We'll do the air jacks. We'll do 89 spec, 88, 89 spec, which is the easiest one to build. He said, I'm sorry, I'm not interested in doing a shell. I'd be interested in doing the whole car for you, though. We never sold one in the USA. Sounds like an awesome project. I said, okay, let's talk about how the payment would work on that. My particular situation, it would be easiest for me to pay him maybe quarterly. And if we set out a quarterly budget, we could then put stop points on. If he was about to exceed the budget to the point where he wasn't comfortable anymore, we could put a stopping point on that, and we could say, okay, stop here. I'll pay you some amount to store the car on your premises, and then when I'm ready, and when you're ready, we'll start again. Seemed a little bit difficult to me, maybe not straightforward enough with someone you didn't know, especially someone overseas who you primarily communicate with on the phone. It felt not totally comfortable, and that's not a sign of distrust at all. I felt like it would be easy for me to get in over my head and overcommit financially. The cost of a car through him is anywhere from $120,000 to $200,000 complete, depending on the spec. Mats Vanderbrand had a similar approach, also super top guy. He's cranking out a lot of cars lately, finding his own style to it. His sweet spot is really rallying. I have no doubt that he couldn't build a nice track car, but I suspect that he would prefer a customer that was just interested in doing rally. He proposed a similar plan to Vink, only if I couldn't meet the assigned payments, he would pay me back and take the car and then sell it to a customer, which means he wanted to build it as a rally car because most of his customers are rally customers. So he would essentially build something that was resellable in the event that I fell through as a customer, which seems pretty reasonable to me, but it also seemed like I would spend a lot of stress about whether I was going to meet a payment or my car that I'd been emotionally invested in would be taken. So ultimately, that wasn't a really good path either, and I didn't really want the responsibility of having to meet payments when it wasn't comfortable, and we decided to not go down that path ultimately. Connected to all of those three themes, none of those vendors that I've seen have built a 91 plus car, and that's something we haven't talked about yet. But there's a lot more fabrication in building a later E30 than an earlier one. All of the early cars were sort of based on this pro-drive rally car shell. The wheel wells weren't modified because they were using 17s. That's a huge step. The strut tops were slightly different. The roll cages were different. I suspect that the cost, if we're talking about a complete car from Vink, because I know he's someone that could easily do it, you'd probably be adding $15,000 or $20,000 of fabrication work to the shell straight away to accommodate the 18-inch wheels and the rest of the stuff. So that was yet another consideration, that no one was putting in front of me a plan to build a 91. So there's several stopping points here. You see, one is money, and the others are the willingness to build a car that not everybody wants. An early shell can easily be converted to rallying. If you're reselling it, there might be more customers. So those are the options that I explored. Ultimately, what I did was none of those things. I looked around and I found someone's abandoned project. This was really timely. I recognize that I'm starting this E30 project in the beginning of a time where this car is at all-time high value. I'll be transparent. I spent $27,000 on this rolling shell. The shell itself was low mileage, not that that matters. It became a race car early in its life and never really raced. I think it did 2 races with BMW CCA. The car had a cage in it. I was planning the entire time to cut that cage out and do another one. The car came with axles, transmission, doors that were cut, unfortunately, in a weird way for lightweight. No deck lid, no wing. It came with 2 hoods and a lot of other parts like grills. It came with a fuel tank, which I'm not going to use, but I sold. I ended up selling a transmission as well. So it came with some good stuff. In my head, I figured this 27 would turn into probably close to 23 after I sold a lot of those parts off, which in fact it did. And from there, I ended up buying a cage from Custom Cages, which I haven't installed yet. So we can tally the total product cost. I'll show a spreadsheet on that. There were a lot of sheet metal and bodywork pieces to buy on this spreadsheet from various vendors, mostly in Europe, that needed to be added to this this project. Once the cage was decided on, I ordered it from the UK, and it took about 2 months to get here. And while I was waiting for it, I started cutting out the existing cage. Now, the existing cage, as you can see, was fabricated very well, but the design was sort of questionable. It was a super sledgehammer approach to how you'd want to build a race car. It didn't conform to any sort of design concept. It didn't look like a proper E30 race car that the factory would have built or that Matter would have built. It had sort of like a NASCAR vibe to it, some super heavy door bars and dash bars. But again, the fabrication was good, and I trusted it was perfectly safe. It's just not what I wanted. If I was ever to do this project again, I would never start with a car that has a cage in it, because I'm still cutting out nodes from corners that are very hard to reach. It's a gross process, and it's taking a long time, and I would recommend against it. I would almost prefer to buy a car that was rusty, that I could do rust repair on, than a caged car. So working through that still. Once the cage is done, well, first, before the cage is done, the car will go to get dipped, then the cage will get installed, and then it'll be primed. The reason you have to do the acid dip first is because if you have a roll cage in the car, you might get some of that solvent trapped in the tubing, and if it gets trapped in there, it can corrode from the inside. It can leak out forever onto your paint. You really can't do that anything but first. So that's where we're at, and we'll show you some pictures of the process. I also have a story to tell you about picking up the car that is sort of funny.